the second in a two-part video series that I'm calling What Happens Behind Hearing Room Doors at the Public Service Commission Does Not Stay Behind Hearing Room Doors at the Public Service Commission, because I want the public to see what actually happens. This gentleman standing in front of you is Preston Thomas. He is the Public Service Commission staff attorney, and he is addressing the commissioners a week after my testimony. He is about to tell the commissioners why my testimony should not have any weight in their minds, that I'm not knowledgeable enough, and that the content of my testimony was incorrect and inappropriate. And so let's hear what he has to say.
I want to take just one moment to briefly respond to concerned ratepayers of Georgia. When suggesting that everything above $6.1 billion should be disallowed, witness Duran did not do a prudence analysis or a quantification of the analysis, and she, according to her resume, is incapable of doing so.
So this is completely ridiculous, because it is not my job to do a prudency analysis. It's actually his job. It's the job of the commission. That's why the commission exists, is to examine the cost and expenses that Georgia Power is spending, and whether or not ratepayers or Georgia Power customers have to pay those costs and expenses. That is their literal job. They exist only for that reason, because Georgia Power is a monopoly, and since they have no competition and are given monopoly by the state of Georgia, it is incumbent on the state of Georgia to ensure that the money they're spending on someone else's behalf, that someone being a customer who has no choice in who their electricity provider is well spent. So the idea that that's something I should have done and my resume doesn't support is ridiculous. Let's see what else.
She has not, for example, identified management action that was unreasonable under the circumstances, given what was known or should have been known at the time the decisions were made.
Again, that's ridiculous. It is not my job to identify those actions. However, I did even do that. So he's wrong to say that I didn't. In my testimony, I made a list. I read a list to the commissioners and included in my written testimony of at least 6 failures in management actions that they did not take that they should have. And furthermore, the CFO of Georgia Power, Mr. Aaron Abramovitz, agreed that they had made serious, significant mistakes and failures in management actions, and that's why they were forgoing $2 billion in what they spent on Plant Vogtle, and they're not asking for recovery for that. However, it should have been much more than $2 billion that Georgia Power didn't get recovery for, but we won't know that because there were no prudency hearings being held to look at those cost overruns.
Or the actions were taken. She hasn't quantified the impact of such actions to show how she derived the $6.1 billion.
Again, that's ridiculous, because everyone knows the $6.1 billion that I suggested and asked the commission to approve for this hearing, for these set of hearings, was what was commissioned at the time that Plant Vogtle was approved in 2009. Everyone knows that $6.1 billion is the cost of construction plus financing. Instead, here we are 14 years later looking at double that amount, or $11.1 billion. And so my testimony last week was to say to the commission, if you're not going to hold prudency and reasonable hearings, then just give them $6.1 billion, as was the original agreement. Now he's acting like he has no idea where that number's coming from. That's just gaslighting.
And most importantly, she has no qualifications to do the analysis. Based on her testimony, she's never worked on a nuclear construction project or any mega construction project. She's never planned, designed, monitored, or overseen construction of a nuclear power plant or any other type of power plant. She's not an engineer or an expert in construction scheduling, design, or procurement.
Again, that's ridiculous. That is not my job. I don't have to be an engineer. I don't have to be knowledgeable in how to build a nuclear power plant. Neither is he. Neither was anybody that sat around the table with Georgia Power negotiating billions of dollars. They should not have been negotiating, because that's far outside of their skill sets. Businesses have experts that they use, that they hire, consultants, when they have high stakes negotiations of just millions of dollars, never mind billions of dollars. This man standing before you has no knowledge about game theory. He's never taken classes on negotiating billions of dollars, nor has he an engineer, nor has he ever built a nuclear power plant. That's just ridiculous.
And responding to the accusation of staff not doing a complete prudence analysis, I'd just like to point to the prior hearings and relevant dockets that are part of this review. We've had over 30 hearings spanning over a decade. We've issued thousands of DRs. We have received hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. We have tens of thousands of pages of testimony and reports in the record. All of this is part of the prudence review.
So this is extremely disappointing for me to watch Preston Thomas gaslight and lie on these issues, because those filings are not prudency hearings. He knows that. If they were, then why did the commission staff hire experts in nuclear engineering earlier this year in February that have been working all year to prepare for prudency hearings, which are not happening? Filings are not prudency hearings, and that distinction is very important. What a cost is reasonable and prudent. If the costs are deemed reasonable and prudent, then customers have to pay those costs. If the costs are deemed not reasonable or not prudent, then Georgia Power must absorb those costs. So to say that my accusation is false because reports are filed is just absurd. The PSC staff alone spent $33 million on these experts to prepare for prudency hearings. So why spend that money if, hey, the filings did the job? They didn't. He's lying.
The irony is that at the same time, Mr. Prunevich was claiming that the review in this case was too cursory. He was also complaining that the 300-page report was too long for him to.
No, the irony is that statement being ridiculous. When Mr. Prunevich asked a question to a panel during cross-examination, he was referred to a table, and he said, with all due respect, I don't know where that table is. It's a 300-page report. Can you tell me where in the report that table is? And now, Mr. Thomas is standing up there saying that he was complaining about the length of the report, but that means that he's being hypocritical, that these hearings are short. These hearings were 11 hours, less than 2 days. Plant Vogel Units 1 and 2 also went over billions of dollars, only half as much billions, but still billions. And those hearings lasted 8 weeks, and many, many costs were disallowed. That's what should have happened here.
That concludes my comments.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Prunevich, go on here. Please sit down. Wait, Mr. Prunevich, don't.
Now, what I want you to see is that after Preston Thomas sat down, Mr. Steve Prunevich, who's the founder of Concerned Ratepayers of Georgia, for whom I testified last week, attempts to address those comments that were made about my testimony to the commission. These are the commissioners sitting around the table, except Commissioner Pridemore is missing. And that man holding his finger up, pointing to Mr. Preston Thomas saying, I don't want to hear it, sit down. That's Commissioner Fitz-Johnson, who is currently chairing this part of the hearing. He's being extremely condescending to Mr. Prunevich, holding his finger up, treating him like he's a little boy. And as you're about to see, he's going to have him thrown out of the hearing.
Want to hear it. Sit.
He makes a very derogatory.
Sir, could you please escort Mr. Prunevich out of the hearing?
The sir he's referring to is the Capitol police officer, a state police officer, who's always in the room during hearings, and he's asked him to escort Mr. Prunevich out, which he does do.
He made very derogatory comments about my witness. I'd like to respond.
Mr. Prunevich, I'm going to ask you to leave, sir.
I'm done.
Thank you.
And there you see Mr. Prunevich leave because the officer is heading his way, and he escorts him out of the building. In 14 years, Mr. Prunevich has never been kicked out of a hearing. He had announced at the beginning of this hearing that it would be his last time before the commission. And yet Mr. Fitz-Johnson, who has no experience and has barely ever chaired a meeting, throws him out. The condescension and inappropriateness of that is unbelievable. So there you go. That's this hearing. More to come.